Yamaraj. That's why the devotees the sages at Naimisharanya, they invited Yamaraj to come and hear the katha there. So he often comes. So welcome. Okay, we are reading today from chapter 23 in the third canto. We have a slew of verses as usual, 36 to 48. We're going to concentrate on 43. Theoretically, that's the theory. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Can we say this one together? Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayam tiraya nasta prayeshu apadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati jamashloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author, and Srila Prabhupada, the translator and commentator. By regular attendance in the classes of the Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the devotees, all of his troubles into the heart, destroyed. I love service unto the personality of Godhead, his praise, his transcendental thought, established as an irrevocable fact. Hare Krishna. So this chapter is called Devahuti's Lamentation. So just to focus in, because I cover so many verses in that slew. It's Kardama Muni and Devahuti. Kardama Muni. Do you know which yuga Kardama Muni lived in? Because that's important. There's an important factor there. Satya Yuga. In in the different ages, people live different amounts of times. Kali Yuga, they're lucky if they can live to 100 years old. Most people don't. No? Previous yugas, they lived a lot longer. And Satya Yuga, the first yuga, which is like springtime, right after the creation, they lived 10,000 years. So Kardama Muni, the average lifespan at that time was 10,000 years. That's important because what we're reading now is okay, hold on a second. So Kardama Muni he got an instruction from Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma asked him to propagate, to help populate the universe, because again, it's the beginning of creation, and there's a lot of space to be filled up with people to get material world and get out. Okay, so he took that instruction very seriously. Now, he wasn't the only propagator. Obviously, there was other people and personalities, and they did different things, etc., but he was part of it. So he took his instruction very seriously, and what he did was, do you remember what he did to start off his following Lord Brahma's instruction? He performed penance. Yes, he meditated. He performed austerities. In other words, he didn't say, okay, I'm just going to go do it. No, he wanted to get his consciousness in. This is, again, another important but subtle point of this. He wanted to get his consciousness in the right place. His consciousness produces the results. Like your endeavor makes you make your endeavor and everything, but what is your consciousness to make that endeavor? Like this stage of your life, it's, perhaps, you're going to school. Because why? Because you want to get a job that provides enough money to support yourself. That could be the thought process, right? It often is. What's the consciousness behind that? So that I can get this and I can that and I can be having da, 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 da. But Kardama Muni's consciousness, he wanted to put his consciousness in the right place so that he could produce nice children that would, again, produce nice children. And what does nice children mean in this context? It means that they were understanding that material world is temporary. I'm here. Yeah, it's nice to have some nice facility, but my goal isn't to stay here. It's not to stay here. It's to move on, move up my consciousness, increase, elevate my consciousness to higher and higher levels so that I can remember, oh, you know what? I don't belong here at all. No matter if it's a nice situation or a bad situation, I actually am a servant of Krishna. So he prepared his consciousness, and he prepared his consciousness, and that took thousands of years. And then the goal of his austerity was to get a nice wife. Now, if you just come in on the story where the goal of his austerity is to get a nice wife, you might think that's not very smart. But it was smart. It was smart for what he had to do, and he realized what he had to do, and so it was a good step. So he got Devahuti. She served him and got skinny and just kept serving. And then when there was time to unite and produce children, there was his wonderfully skinny, bedraggled, worn to the bone wife, and so he produced an aerial mansion. I'm sure you remember that. I'm sure before that she dipped into the water, became useful and beautiful again, and then they went around in their aerial mansion for 100 years, traveling to all these beautiful places. And then at the end, then they had their union, and they produced 9 daughters. That's the gist of the story. We're in the middle of that story someplace. Om Maganachimedantasya Jananjana Salakaya Chaksu Umilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Purve Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master very kindly opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. Therefore, I'm indebted to him. It's a debt that I can never pay, but I'm going to keep trying. Life after life. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So we'll start with 36 and 37. That's our verse. We go to 48. 36, 37, and we'll go back. So we'll just read the English when you get that up on the screen. So this is the part, she had just went into that sacred Bindu Sarovar lake and got all refreshed and came out really beautiful. Okay, so this is 37, 38. Yes.
Sage could see that Devahuti has washed herself clean, shining forth for no longer as former wife. She had regained her own original beauty as the daughter of Prince. Dressed in excellent robes, charming breasts, duly
Duly girded.
girded.
Okay.
She was waited upon by the thousands of Gandharva girls. O destroyer of the enemy, his fondness for grew, and he placed her on aerial mansion.
Though seemingly attached to his beloved consort while served by the Gandharva girls, the sage did not lose his glory, which was mastery over his self. In the aerial mansion, Kardama Muni, with his consort, shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night.
What kind of lilies open at night in the ponds?
White lotus.
Lotuses, yeah. Good. Continue.
In that area mentioned, he traveled to the pleasure valleys of the South, which were rendered all the more beautiful and stimulated. These valleys, treasure of the gods, Vera, surrounded by wheat and raised by the generally enjoys pleasure. Parallelly also surrounded by the wheat and went there and enjoyed.
Kita.
Satisfied by his wife, he enjoyed in that aerial mansion, not only on Mount Meru, but in different gardens known as Vaishrambaka, Surasana, Nandana, Pushpabhadraka, and Chaitraratya, and by the Manasa Sarovar lake.
He traveled in that way through the various planets, as the air passes uncontrolled in every direction, coursing through the air in that great and splendid aerial mansion, which could fly at his will. He surpassed even the demigods.
Just a little point here. Don't forget that this mansion was produced by his yogic powers. Do you remember some of the description of that mansion? Your previous classes?
Yeah.
What do you remember?
7 stories.
7 stories. Then what?
There's pools, and gold and precious stones everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And birds, and then there's sculptured birds, and then there's real birds, and it's not just an airplane. It's a city. It's a flying city. And how did it move? It moved by his will. And this is, you have to, so the description sounds very nice and sensuous and everything, right? And let's just say we had a glimpse of that or access to that. Would our attitude be self-controlled and this and that? And, realizing, focused on the Lord and everything and realizing I'm still doing my duty here? No, it would be more likely, say over the edge, just thinking, I need mine, how can I enjoy? And this is wonderful. But so again, just to emphasize the position of his consciousness. Okay, continue on. Next verse, please.
What is difficult to achieve for determined men who have taken refuge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's lotus feet. His feet are the source of sacred rivers like the Ganges, which put an end to the dangers of mundane life.
How can we have some microphones that are loud and some are soft? Who's in charge
Yeah,
of
we
that?
had
Okay, anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
After coming back to his hermitage, he divided himself into 9 personalities just to give pleasure to Devahuti, the daughter of Manu, who was eager for sex life. In that way, he enjoyed with her for many, many years, which passed just like a moment.
Handsome husband.
Can't get in.
Not realize how much time.
While the couple who eagerly longed for sexual pleasure were thus enjoying themselves by virtue of mystic powers, 100 autumns passed like a brief span of time.
Go to 48.
Powerful, heart of Buddha was the knower of everyone's heart, and he could grant whatever one desired. Knowing the spiritual soul, he regarded her as half of his body. Dividing himself into 9 forms, he impregnated 9 discharges.
One more verse.
Immediately afterward, on the same day, Devahuti gave birth to 9 female children, all charming in every limb and fragrant with the scent of the red lotus flower.
So if you're paying attention to the details here, it's quite interesting, right? So Kardamamuni expanded himself into 9 forms and impregnated his wife 9 times. That very same day, she gave birth to 9 daughters. Not just little fluffy, ugly little things, but fragrant daughters as beautiful as lotuses. So again, well, we'll get to it when we, okay, so our verse that we're going to concentrate on is verse 44. So if you can zoom in on 44, that would be nice. So okay, the storyline, Devahuti served her husband for many years, became skinny and neglected her body because she was only considering her service to her husband, dipped into the magic lake, came up refreshed, beautiful, enlivened, gorgeous, went with her husband on and he produced an aerial mansion because, okay, his natural setting where he is now in this verse 44 we're coming to, he went back to his cottage, which is just a simple little cottage, right? In Manasiganga or in the Shirovara area, whatever, in the forest area. So in order to raise children, Devahuti said, can we have a little more facility here, please, So he produced this aerial mansion, this and that. They went around, they went to some places, they enjoyed religious sex life. So yes, we have restrictions in the Krishna consciousness movement. No meat eating, fish or eggs, but it doesn't mean we don't eat. We eat so nicely. Food that's offered to Krishna, right? We restrict what we hear, but we hear so many nice things. We refrain from illicit sex, but it's not that there's no sex, but that sex life has a purpose. There's not a purpose of gross, of trying to satisfy the senses through that act, but it's an act of sacrifice. And when it's performed and approached in that way, there's good results that happen. Not only is it pleasurable, but the results of the children that are produced from that religious union have a good consciousness. They have a consciousness that's inclined to spiritual life. It happens. You can see it. You can see it throughout our movement. It happens that way. Sometimes you see people that are not so inclined. Sometimes you see little children. It's just quite amazing. Sometimes they come into the room, they say, Prabhupada, they bow down right away, and they're like a year old or something. There's a connection. There's a connection between past lives and the life that they take now to make further progress. And then the burden, because it is a burden of raising a family, it is a burden. It's a duty. It's not always pleasant. There's so much endeavor that has to go into it, but that burden is successful, and it's not as burdensome. I don't know how to, it's not as dry and unsatisfying as just material endeavor for family life. So anyway, point being, yes, Prabhu, what's your point or question or comment? It's okay.
Sorry, I didn't know you were about to get to a point.
That's all right.
I can still share?
Yes.
Okay. When we went on our trip and we were in Washington, D.C., we stayed overnight there, and we went to a gentleman's house who gave us Bhagavatam class the next day. And we stayed at his house, and he was Grihasta. He had 3 children. And one of his children was 7 years old, and he's chanting 9 rounds every day. And we chanted with him before bed. And that was probably one of the biggest highlights and like the most inspiring thing that happened to me. And that's just an example of what you were speaking about.
There's another little example that I saw on the internet. This nice devotee's name is Hari Parsha. Brilliant devotee, And he was chanting his japa, and his little, my guess is 6-month-old baby, little 6-month-old baby was sitting there. And every time, so Hari Parsha would be chanting Hare Krishna. And then it'd stop, and the baby would start to cry. And then it'd start to chant, the baby would stop crying. And then it would be chanting, and then it'd stop. And the baby again would start to cry because he wanted him to keep chanting. That's not, anyway. Okay, back to here. So Cardamom, he traveled all around the universe. He produced this aerial mansion. When he produced the aerial mansion, do you remember what his reaction was by any chance? Yeah, exactly. Wow, he was astonished. Devahuti was astonished. He was also astonished. He didn't realize that he could do that. But that's how powerful he was. But did he stay in those Nanda gardens and the other gardens no, he came back to his little simple hermitage. Okay, and that's the point of this verse. We're on 44. Can you think you can handle chanting the Sanskrit together? We'll go slow. Yeah. Just click in there. We'll go slow. If you just go slow and get all the syllables in there, you'll be okay. Together now. Vibhajana vadatmanam manavim shuratokshukam raman niramayam reme varsha punam muhurtavat. Okay, and then the translation is, after coming back to his hermitage, Oh, is that the one? Or was always supposed to do? Hold on, I might have the wrong one. Is it 43 that we're supposed to be doing? I know because I remember I did look at the verses. Yep. No, it's 43. Something. Oh, hold on. Just check. 43 we're supposed to do. Sorry. Okay, let's do the same thing. Prekshayitva bhuvo golam patnyayavan svasamstaya bhavascharam mahayogi svashramaya nyavartata. After showing his wife the globe of the universe and its different arrangements, full of many wonders, the great yogi Kardama Muni turned to his own hermitage. Does somebody want to start reading the purport a little bit? Go right ahead.
All the all the planets are here described as Gola, round. Every planet is round, and each planet is a different shelter, just like the islands in the great oceans. Planets are sometimes called Dvapa or Varsa. This Earth planet is called Parvata Varsa because it was ruled by King Bharat. Another significant
Bharata. Bharata, what you eat. Bharata is the king.
King
Go on.
Bharata. Another significant word used in this verse is Baba Akshyaman. Many wonderful things. This indicates that the different planets are distributed all over the universe in the 8 directions, and each and every one of them is wonderful in itself. Each planet has its particular climate, influence, and particular types of inhabitants, and is completely equipped with everything, including the beauty of the seasons.
Okay, hold on a second. So can you remember a verse? Do you remember a verse that has particularly emphasized this point? Each planet has its particular climatic influence and particular types of inhabitants and is completely equipped with everything. It's a complete whole. That's my clue. You know the verse? Yeah, okay. How does it go? Om Purnam Adaha Purnamidam. Krishna is the complete whole. And he's so complete that he's expanding himself. And everything that comes from him is also complete in itself. And he is not reduced by making those expansions. So the earth, the universes, they're complete in themselves. They have everything they need to sustain themselves. And also another point that's being made in this up to this point in the purport is that, like, Lord Brahma's duty, Lord, so that the Lord, the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, he's the source of everything. So he creates the ingredients, sarga. He creates the ingredients, and Brahma, from the pool, you could say, or from the supply of ingredients, Brahma, he makes the secondary creation, visharga. So, and his duty is to take all the planetary systems and organize them in such a way for different classes of human beings or different living entities who have what? Different types of consciousness. So the different living entities who have different types of consciousness get different types of atmospheres. So roughly divided into lower, middle, and heavenly planets, people who have lower consciousness go to planets where there's facility for their low consciousness. And oftentimes there's much more suffering, there's much more pain, there's much more darkness there, because it's always, consciousness is always compared to light, darkness and light. Consciousness is covered and you're not realizing who you are or that you have any spirituality at all. It's dark consciousness. So the atmosphere around is usually dark, etc., etc. There's planets, when you read that up to the 5th canto stays, probably really soon, where you guys go. There's planets that they're just full of little animals that eat each other. You know, that's how they all survive. That's called survival of the fittest. There's different, but then when you come up to the middle planetary system, like this planetary system, middle planetary system, earthly planets, there's pleasure, there's nice atmospheres, and then there's mixed. Then there's also difficult situations. There's beautiful Hawaiian islands, and then there's what, New York City or whatever. Different situations for the different mentalities. And then in the heavenly planets, they were described earlier with part of it traveling all around to heavenly gardens and extensive pleasure and so many opulences. Like the struggle for existence is much less. Existence, like in the middle planetary systems, you have to make your endeavor, and by the sweat of your brow, I could say, then you get so much to work with. In the spiritual world, work isn't necessary. Everything's provided by the Lord. Everything's provided. People look like they're working, milking the cows or whatever. But everything's provided by the Lord. Because why? They're in sync. They're in total sync with He's the center, Krishna's the center, I'm his servant, and he's providing without, huge endeavors. So that back to Brahma, that's his position every day of Brahma. That's what he has to do. Arrange the planetary systems in certain ways, certain amount of suffering and less amount of sufferings, and then put all the living entities who have acted in a certain way in their proper positions. Ones who have acted piously or extremely piously get to nicer situation, heavenly situation. Ones who have acted extremely sinfully get a lower situation and a lot of suffering and difficulty. He has to do that every day. Okay, we're in the Brahma Samhita. Like to continue? Somebody like to Brahma Samhita 540?
In the Brahma Samhita, it is stated, Vibhuti Vinam. On each and every planet, there are different opulences. It cannot be expected that one planet exactly like another. By God's grace, by nature's law, each and every planet is made differently and has different wonderful features. All such wonders were personally experienced by Kardama Muni while he traveled with his wife. Yet he could return again to his humble hermitage. He showed his princess wife that although he was living in the hermitage, he had the power to go everywhere and do anything by mystic yoga.
Okay, so let's stop here and contemplate that one point. That's a really important point. He could go everywhere and he saw all those different wonders and opulences of the different situation, but he chose. It was his choice. He wasn't forced. He was that powerful that he could produce an aerial mansion. Then he could travel all over the place. He wasn't forced to come back to the hermitage, but he came back to the hermitage. What do you think are some reasons that he did that? What would be the benefits of him doing that? You see any downsides? Yes, Prabhu. Maintain his focus. You hit the nail right on the head. I didn't expect that. Good. Yeah, to maintain his focus. He lived in a simple atmosphere to maintain his focus so that he would be able to keep his consciousness elevated and not be distracted by the wonders and the beauties and the opulences and the sense gratification and this and that, get distracted from his duty and then get what? Entangled. That's the thing. That's the factor there that we often forget. Our choices all have repercussions. Our actions all have repercussions. And those actions and choices that we make lead us to our next situation. We're in this situation because of things that we've done in the past. We're in another situation again because of, and what we're doing now is going to lead us to another situation. And that's why this opportunity that you have to spend some time here in Krishna House and develop your consciousness to such a point to realize it might not be the highest pleasure in the material world being here in Krishna House as far as opulence and everything goes, but it is the highest pleasure because it has to do with getting spiritual spiritually elevated. So it has the highest benefit. So again, another reason to think of why it's so important to take advantage of the opportunity that you have. So important to take advantage of the opportunity that you have and continue that throughout your life. There was something else. Oh yeah, but we were talking about to maintain his focus. So he chose to come back to that simple atmosphere, even though he could live in any kind of an atmosphere that he wanted. But he chose a simple atmosphere so that he could make the most progress. And that's a thing to remember as you're at a very crucial junction in your life at this particular point, often, or a lot of you. What you're going to do for your career, that's your choice, but think of the repercussions that will bring. Try to do something that will enable you to keep your focus. And for those who have larger capacity, do larger things and still keep focused. And those of us who have not such a big capacity, we prefer to keep life really simple and small, we could say, so that our focus can stay. Okay. That's the perfection of yoga. Would someone like to continue? Gita, would you like to continue there? That is the perfection of yoga. He showed his princess wife. Okay, we got it.
That is the perfection of yoga. One cannot become a perfect yogi simply by showing some sitting postures, nor by such sitting postures or so-called meditation can one become God, as is being advertised. Foolish persons are misled into believing that simply by some caricature of meditation and sitting postures, one can become God within 6 months. Keep going.
Yeah.
Here is the example of a perfect yogi. He could travel all over the universe. Similarly, there's a description of Durvasa Muni, who also traveled in space. Actually, the perfect yogi can do that. But if one can travel all over the universe and show wonderful feats like Kardama Muni, he cannot be compared to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose power and inconceivable energy can never be attained by any conditioned or liberated soul. By the actions of Kardama Muni, we can understand that in spite of his immense mystic power, he remained a devotee of the Lord. That is the real position of every living entity.
And that's the real point. Thank you, dear. And that's the real point of this story, or one of the main points of the stories. I'm sure there's lots of different points you can get reading parts of it, but that's the real point. Now, one can we've seen that in material life, the more one gets power and opulences and riches and fame and influence, the more it usually goes to the person's head, and they exploit the situation to the max for whatever their motivation is, usually for more fame, more power, more strength, more influence, and totally disregarding where's the source of that power coming. So we just had Nrsingadev's appearance there not too long ago, so I'm sure it's fresh in your mind. When Hiranyakashipu, he was so powerful that all the demigods were subservient to him out of fear. Everybody was subservient. Everybody, when Hiranyakashipu raised his eyebrow, everyone trembled. Everyone but Prahlad, 5 years old. And so you would think, right? Now, if a person had that much influence, right, that the whole universe was under his control, what difference does it make if this 5-year-old boy doesn't accept its authority? You know what I mean? He's got a lot of stuff going for him, right? Theoretically, right? But it bothered him so much that he wanted to kill him. And it was his own, yeah, I know you know the story, and it was his own son. So that bond of parental love could be broken in a half of a second by somebody whose consciousness is in such a degraded place, even though they're seemingly elevated by quote unquote material standards. But this is here, Kardama Muni, he's exhibiting he's exhibiting the real opulence of a devotee, that even though he's that powerful, he's not interested in those things. He's interested in maintaining his position as a servant of the Lord, and he doesn't want to sway from that for a millimeter or a nanosecond or anything, any division of time or space. He doesn't want to deviate from that or take the risk of that deviation. So that's like quite amazing. And Bhagavad Gita explains in the 14th, yeah, divine and demoniac nature, that this mentality that Hiranyakashipu exhibited, that's like the epitome of demoniac. So much wealth is mine today, and I'm going to gain more. There are people in politics this day and age that are trying to run for president, have a similar attitude. But anyway, so much is mine, and I'll gain more, and this is mine, and that is mine, and I'll dispose of my enemies, and I'll talk bad about this and that, whatever. And I'm so powerful, and I'm so rich. So when Hiranyakashipu asked his son Prahlad, that's the point I almost forgot that I wanted to make. So when Hiranyakashipu asked his son, "Where do you get your power from? How can you be so powerful that you're not afraid of me?" That's what he was really asking, although he didn't put it in those words. How can you be so powerful that you're not afraid of me? And Prahlad said, "I get my power from the same place you get yours." Yeah, and that's just what he thought. Really? The Supreme Lord is the source of all that power. And someone who acknowledges that is can you think of some examples that Prabhupada gives? Because sometimes when we hear these philosophical terms and concepts, then Prabhupada or the Vedas give these really simple, natural examples. So he gives us a particular example about water. An elephant in the water and a little fish in the water. Does that make a click of remembrance of what that example is? You want to tell us about it?
Big elephant, powerful animal. Butter, she has no skill to take shelter. It's easily swept by the current.
Yeah.
And a little teeny fish, nothing in comparison.
Nothing.
Because he had skill to take shelter of it. It's upstream, downstream, down, it's just easy.
Yeah. That isn't so doesn't that picture in your mind, it just really like puts it all in place. Thanks. Yeah, it puts it all in place. So we take shelter of the Supreme Lord, and we're able to maneuver through materialistic life under his shelter, and it doesn't affect us as it does someone outside the shelter of the Supreme Lord, getting batted and this and crashed and smashed and elevated here and happy over here and then smashed and battered. And it doesn't mean, again, sometimes we have the misconception that, okay, I'm going to take shelter of Krishna and have no problems. Can you give me an example of people from the Bhagavatam who took shelter of Krishna and had no problems in life? Dhruva, he had a problem. Dhruva, yeah, but the point is he had a problem okay, we're gonna come back to Dhruva as an example, okay? But anyway, the thing is that there's so many examples of the devotees in the Bhagavatam. They all had intense difficulties. Yeah, it was. They all had intense difficulties, but because they took shelter of Krishna, the Pandavas, Kunti, this one, Dhruva, etc., they didn't suffer like an ordinary person would, like Hiranyakashipu, trying to figure it out on his own. They didn't suffer like that. They still had, there was, Arjuna, when Abhimanyu was killed, did he think, oh, Abhimanyu's not my son, I'm not my body, Krishna's the Supreme Lord? No, he was really upset. He remembered all of those things gradually, but still he was really upset. But because he took shelter of Krishna, because he was taking shelter of Krishna, he was able to keep his head on his shoulders to a certain extent, you could say, or at the point being not um, not suffer that continual suffering that material world is expert at providing. Another example is, I was just thinking of it. Oh yeah, the difference, Prabhupada gives an example, the Vedic example. The difference between somebody who leaves their home, son of a rich man leaves his home and goes and lives on his own for a while, etc., etc. His father's always worrying about him, but the son's on his own. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But his father's quite wealthy. Or the difference between that person and someone who's actually been orphaned, and he's got no parents, no shelter, no this, no support. Their position might look similar if they're on the street walking together. It might look similar, but their position is much different and much more difficult for the orphan who has no financial, material, emotional support, than the rich boy's son. All he has to do is say, "Okay, Dad, I'm coming home. Can you help me out?" Of course, he's going to say yes. It might be, the relationship might be strained for a certain time, but once it's set back in its proper setting, then everything is very easily rectified. So that's one of the take-home lessons from this story. That Kardamuni, he wanted to keep his situation simple enough that he could maintain a high level of consciousness. So therefore he chose to live in a simple setting. Now that could be a lesson that we could just keep in the back of our minds. How we decide to go forward in our life. If one has the capacity to do something like get an aerodynamics and degree or whatever, things that are way beyond me, that's okay. But if they're taking shelter of the Supreme Lord, then they can maneuver through things. But someone who doesn't have that capacity and just realizes, this material endeavor for accumulating more and more just for the sake of accumulating more and more isn't very conducive, isn't very satisfying, and it's a huge amount of wasted energy. Let me just live simply. That mentality is much more enriched. Any comments, questions, thoughts, feedback? Yes, Prabhu. Discussion.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for the class. Contrary to Kardama's good example in the purport, there are those who forget about their place, their true position. And Prahlad's father being the epitome, one of the greatest examples of those who have forget their place. There's that story, if you can tell us shortly. It's like a illustration story of Mushika.
Mushika Baba.
Yes, that's a nice example.
Good one.
Of how,
okay.
I don't know if you want to.
Okay. All right. So just before I forget, I was going to come back to Dhruva Maharaj. Okay. So then I'll go to Punamushtika Baba. When Nishi gave the example about Dhruva Maharaj, who didn't have any troubles in his life, Dhruva Maharaj is a really good example for us also, because he's a shining example of someone who approached the Lord with the material desire. So it's not that we're expected to walk in the door of Krishna house and have no material desires, know this, know that, and give up everything, totally surrender to Krishna, whatever he wants. No, we have our baggage, but we're learned through the example of Dhruva Maharaj that yes, take your baggage and whatever sincerity and desire for spiritual advancement that you can muster up, follow along in that path, and gradually the heart will become and all success will be there. Okay, thanks. So Punamushtika Baba, that's a really interesting story. Once upon a time, there was a little cat, or sometimes they say a mouse. Okay, we're going to start with cats, okay? There was a little cat that approached the sage. And there's a very powerful sage in the forest meditating, and the little cat comes by and says, can you help me? He said, what's your problem? He said, the dogs are always giving me trouble. And it starts with the mouse, yeah. You get to be a mouse, yeah, okay. So the mouse comes, and then who's chasing the mouse? The foxes? Cat? Oh, yeah, thanks. So the mouse comes, the cat's always giving me trouble. And sage says, well, what would you like? What would you like me to do about that? I said, well, I want to become a cat. Okay, granted. He becomes a cat. And so it's progress, right? From a mouse to a cat, he's making progress, right? But then, so he goes away, he thinks he's going to be totally happy. And then he comes back a few weeks later and says, it's the dogs that are giving me trouble now. And so I'd like to become a dog. Then I won't be bothered by them. So it becomes a dog, and then somebody else is harassed. Then it becomes the next one. Then it becomes a lion. It says, I want to be a lion because then nobody will bother. The sage said, okay, you can have it. You can do that. But the point is the guy's missing the point all along. So anyway, so he becomes a lion, and then what happens? Nothing happens. He's just sitting there looking at the sage. Tasty. And he says, oh, so what are you thinking? He said, well, now I'll eat you. Oh, that's what you think? Okay. And a mouse. He's forgetting well, okay, you tell me, what's the message of the story there? Don't bite the hands. Very good. Gita, how would you like to put it?
It's kind of about pride, and you can't appreciate or face the Lord if you're proud. But so that Purnamask above is like when the Lord actually really humbles us again. So we remember that, maybe our position is most advantageous if we need humility to be humble towards the Lord's great power.
Thanks. Other lessons that you take from that? You're stretching your hand at the wrong time because it looks like a raised hand, but it's okay. Yes, Nate. The grass, we have that tendency to think the grass is always, they're enjoying more. I'm suffering now, but if I just would go up a notch, then that reminded me, that one reminded me of, when Srila Prabhupada met with the printers in Japan, Dynapan printers, they have a very formal business arrangement, etc. So he was in their conference room or whatever, meeting room, and all the different top executives came in and put their cards on the table. The owner, the this one, the CEO, the chief of this, of that one, and then this little secretary there. And then at the end of the conference, he had his discussion about the cost of books, etc., etc. And then at the end, one of the workers came up and was talking to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada asked him what he wanted to achieve in that company. And so he very dramatically took his card, which was on the bottom by now, and all the other more important cards were on the top. He took his card from the bottom of the deck and placed it on the top. I want to be the chief, So that's what we're thinking. But Krishna very kindly arranges, as Gita was saying, and as Prabhu was saying, he very kindly arranges us to learn our lesson of humility and our position, that everything's coming from the Lord. And if I could learn to be satisfied with what I get, if I could learn that by realizing that what I'm getting is the result of what I've done in the past. So it's not unfair. It's not unjust. It's not this. I've acted in a certain way to get this certain ball of wax called my life. And if I act in a certain way now in this life by trying to develop my Krishna consciousness, I'll get a position that will be more conducive to that, more and more conducive to that in the future. That's one thing. You want to add any commentary? Thanks for reminding me where it started. Okay, so we're over time, but Shruti Sarkar's not here, so any other comments or takeaways? Any takeaways, Prabhu?
One really quick thing that was interesting because we read about it yesterday, that influence over people is actually like a yogic mystic power. So with Haran, I put that same thing together you're talking about today with Hiranyakashipu when he went in, he gained influence over all the demigods and Indra. And he, besides the boons to be immortal, like he was also granted all mystic powers.
Yeah.
So he had that anger, where he lifted his eyebrow and everybody's afraid of him. But then now, he also had this mystical influence over people, and he would just tell them like, "Hey, what do you do?" Like the demigods, "Oh, okay, you're in charge of the rain. Okay, well, it's already taking care of itself. So just do something mundane for my service, like play some music for me or something." But
Sweep the floor.
I, then so, but then also I think Prahlad Maharaj is a good example of somebody who has all of those. He has that same position that his father had after his father's annihilated, and he used it correctly for millennia after. But we don't hear too much about that. But
Yeah.
we know that we
Yeah.
had a
He actually, and to elaborate on your point, actually Prahlad Maharaj had more power than Hiranyakashipu. He had more power. That's such an interesting point. He had more power. Actually, in Nectar Devotion, when Prabhupada explains about the mystic cities, Anima Lagima, you can become bigger than the bigger or smaller than the smaller, so you can control this and you can control that. He says these are all material powers. These are all material pleasures. And he says specifically, he says one can gain a great amount of material happiness by having control over these powers. But he said, even now we can see materialistic scientists have created most of those powers. They can enter into the earth, they can fly in the sky, they can do so many things. But and so he's making the point, these are all mechanical powers, material powers. But the real power is control the senses, develop the love of God. That's a real exhibition of real power. So as we make our humble attempt to surrender to Krishna, and we see that the mind is running here and there during our japa, and our senses are going here and there during the day and everything, don't be discouraged by that. I mean, it's natural. Don't be discouraged. We've been in this material world for so long, but by the sincere application of the process, gradually, the ways of distraction, they will reduce. You'll see it. And they have already reduced in your life, even might have been here just 2 weeks. They've already reduced in your life, and they'll continue to do that. So keep at it. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Karnavuna ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Prasadam ki jai, Hari Hari Bol. Hari Hari. Then Brahmani lives. Swapunya, Majan, Swaso, fortunate person, love, faith, Prasad, virtue, Govinda, transcendental, and Vaishnava.